New videos every day.
Let me start over again. I'm John Breeding. It's January 11th on Friday. Mike asked me to respond to this latest PBS Frontline special called The Medicated Child. I'd been hearing a lot about it, but had basically avoided watching it because I just get so disgusted watching this tragic phenomenon of drugging our children into oblivion. But this was a fairly big deal, and a lot of people saw it. And so I want to respond to it. I went ahead and watched it yesterday and felt the disgust. It's kind of like the saying from, I believe it's George Orwell, or no, I think it was Henry David Thoreau, actually, so I'm not sure about this, but he says, "My outrage at my country spoils my walk." That dynamic. So right now I'm kind of angry at Mike. You know, it's that old blaming the guy who wanted you to look at something that's hard to look at. So maybe you get mad at your friend or your family or your loved one or whatever because they're telling you you're just sinking yourself into TV oblivion too much. You need to pay attention. Or look at this horrible stuff that's going on in Guantanamo Bay. And you say, I don't want to see any more torture and interrogation. And I'll stick my head in the sand like the ostriches and not pay attention. I'll just watch the TV debates, you know, and watch the presidential candidates basically argue about their hairstyle or whatever, or the pundits arguing about who cries the best or who comes across with the most charisma or whatever, you know. But neither one of them talks about Guantanamo. So I'm really not angry at Mike, but I really am angry. So here's the deal. This Frontline video called The Medicated Child. It's on PBS Frontline. Here's the thing where you can watch it. And so it's a story about the controversy around the drugging of our nation's children. You know, we've got literally millions upon millions upon millions of school-age children and younger than school-age children, as you'll see in this video if you watch it, who are being drugged with heavy-duty, hardcore, toxic, addictive psychiatric drugs. That's the reality. So I don't know if I want to encourage you to be angry or encourage understanding or what. I guess I just want to respond to this. And if you've already seen the thing, then this will just be some shared thoughts about it. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to consider watching it just as an educational experience. And notice what you feel and think as you watch it. Right? You could watch it first and then listen to the rest of this. Or you could go and listen to this and then watch it. Some things I encourage you to think about when you watch it is a challenge to practice the discernment of fact, theory, and opinion. You know, what's a fact, what's a theory, what's an opinion? And if you do that, it becomes very clear that this phenomenon of giving all these drugs to all these children has nothing to do with scientific fact at all. It's completely theory and opinion. And that's real important to know. The other thing that's real important to know in terms of watching things like this or reading something, you know, is what underlying assumptions are going to be slipped in, and then every conversation builds on that. So that watching these doctors in this Frontline video talk about, you know, how to handle these children and what drugs to use and what protocols to use and things like that, it's kind of like watching a bunch of lawyers or attorney generals, whether it's Gonzalez or Mukasey or whatever, arguing the details of what constitutes torture, you know, or what constitutes legal interrogation, you know. And so whether waterboarding is torture, you know. So one is assuming that this interrogation practice is valid. Two, that it's valid, you know, to use torture. And three, that it's valid to just then quibble about the semantics of torture. The underlying assumptions are built in there. Here, you know, you hear these doctors arguing about the scientific research and how to go forward with this and how to test the kids and how to this and this, but the underlying assumption that the kids are sick and need the drugs is gone in there without any scientific validation. Very, very important. Because the other thing to know when reading or looking at whatever, and this is very relevant, like with the so-called presidential debates or this or whatever, is like there's who's there and there's who's not there. It's like the recent exclusion of, say, Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich from the Democratic and Republican debates, respectively, on some of the TV channels. The people who are not allowed to be there, so that conversation's not even there. Similarly, in this Frontline video, there was nobody present in terms of the main voices, either professionally or parent-wise, around people who are really challenging this drug dynamic. You know, you didn't have Peter Breggin, you didn't have Ty Colbert, you didn't have Fred Bauman, you didn't have John Breeding, you didn't have Bruce Levine, you didn't have any of these professionals, right? You didn't have any of the parents from Able Child or from riddleanddeath.com or any of the parents whose children have died from these drugs and spoken out, or any of the parents who've, just really challenged this phenomenon. They weren't included. They're all readily available, right? So all that's screened out. Very important to be aware of as you watch this dynamic. But the thing that really rips your heart out is to see these kids. Jacob's story starts out 3 years old, supposedly has ADHD. The parents courageously resist the drugging. They finally give in after hammering from educators and doctors and everybody, and probably friends and family, who knows. And pretty soon he's on 8 or 9 different drugs. And when you see him later on, as a teenager, he's got tardive dyskinesia, he's sluggish, he can barely talk, it sounds like, and he's doomed to a lifetime as a chronic mental patient. And the parents have accepted this. They've just been overwhelmed and obliviated by the propaganda and the pressure, and they're just not even able to think enough to look at what's scientific fact, what's in the best interest of my child. They can only see their child as a sick, defective young person who can have a halfway, menial, pathetic existence if he takes all his drugs and medications for the rest of his life. It is so sad, and he's got permanent neurological damage. Perfectly normal child now has permanent neurological damage, not because he has anything like some nonsensical bipolar fictitious illness, but because he's permanently damaged by these toxic psychotropic drugs, as well as probably is going to end up with diabetes and all kinds of problems from the neuroleptics that he's taken. It's very, very sad. Just very, very sad. And all the professionals have to say is, well, we're just experimenting. It's an experiment. It's a gamble. We don't really know. But I guarantee you that they need the drugs, the medication. It's just evil, masked in the face of science. Remember my other videos and the quote from Zatz, the Inquisition is to heresy as psychiatry is to mental illness. They say it's a gamble. They say it's uncertain. They say it's a risk. They say we'll have great we're doing great research. We'll know a lot more in 5 to 10 years. They've been saying that for 200 years. Remember Howard Zinn, if you don't know history, it's as if you were born yesterday. So you actually believe these guys? Kind of like President Bush saying, they've got weapons of mass destruction. They're evil. We need to go to war. And then you figure out that he was lying and you say, oh, that's just Bush. You don't realize that every president has always lied. Just like the Johnson administration lied about the Gulf of Tonkin incident in order to launch war or continue and escalate war in Vietnam. This is a pattern with psychiatry. Of course, you don't know that from watching this video, but I'm telling you. And you could research that if you wanted to. But Jacob's life is down the tubes to a large extent, as well as his family has lost this child because they didn't have the awareness and wherewithal and strength and courage to follow their initial inclinations to resist these doctors. And they say the outcomes are uncertain and that kind of stuff. Well, that's true if you buy into this idea that the kid's sick. But if you understand the real dynamic that's driving this thing, it's not uncertain at all. It's very certain that Big Pharma makes massive profits. And if this guy is a permanent lackey in product market for psychiatry and the pharmaceutical industry, That's guaranteed. Maximum profit. Millions of kids for ADHD, but over 1 million for so-called bipolar now. I've talked before on the video about most of these kids who are diagnosed bipolar started out diagnosed ADHD. The bipolar symptoms come on as a result of the ADHD drugs. So they go from the stimulant to the antidepressant to the mood stabilizer to the antipsychotic. And that's what you see laid out exactly in this Frontline piece. DJ's story, age 4. This delightful little guy who's got some tantrums. Now he's on at least Focalin, Clonidine, Risperdal, and Trileptal. You're going to see a tragic decline, just like you saw with Jacob. Very sad. And diabetes. And what you hear from the parents is it's do or die. There's no choice. It's scary. Main symptom, irritability, if you hear from the doctors. I get real irritable around this dynamic. And children are supposed to have tantrums. And parents and adults are supposed to hold the child in a loving way and let them go through it and help them. It's very sad. And then you see Jessica's story. Supposedly, according to this great doctor, she's classic symptoms of bipolar, which means she's grandiose and euphoric. I saw a 5-year-old girl who's 4-year-old, 5-year-old girl who's just delightful. She's got a great imagination. She's telling stories. She's revealing some things that maybe she needs to work on as well, but mostly she's just a hoot. And they're seeing a sick, defective, mentally ill child, and now she's on all kinds of drugs. And they say it's the only way to keep her settled down. I don't want my children settled down. I want to play and roughhouse and wrestle with them. And if they got some hard feelings to deal with, I want to be there close with them, and let them cry and let them kick and let them scream and just love them through it. Wildest colts make the best horses, one of my books. Read the chapter about Eric. It's really about me. Eric's my son. I was going through that with him when he was 4. He's now 21. He's coming back from Indonesia today. I'm looking forward to seeing him. Back to DJ's parents. They bring in a chapter in this Frontline series about preventing bipolar. So now the doctor wants to give drugs to kids as a preventative, which means poison them before they even show the symptoms that supposedly allow them to poison them. So this scares the parents a little bit. They go back to talk to their doctor. They say, we really would like to withdraw him, get him off some of these drugs. Can we do some alternatives? And this Dr. Bacon says, well, it's 99% medication is what he needs. And they gave up. And he's a criminal. This Dr. Chang guy, a student of Biederman's, I gather, who's the guy that really launched this bipolar epidemic, says we got a theory that we can prevent bipolar by dealing with the brain before it kindles too much of this weird stuff. And that's real scientific, isn't it? Give me a break. And of course, Frontline at least does show that this guy works for about a dozen drug companies. I don't know the number, but there were several of them. That's criminality. That's ethical conflict. That's conflict of interest. That's not science. That's a guy who's a lackey for an industry. And he's justified it in the cloud of confusion that he's got around what medicine is. Very sad. Very, very sad. They throw in the classic thing where the guy compares ADHD or bipolar to cancer. Cancer, you have a biopsy, you find a malignancy. Bipolar, you look at somebody's behavior and judge it as grandiose or whatever. And you see a little child is excitable and fantastical in her thinking, and you call her bipolar. Or you see a kid who's devastated because he's not getting his needs met, and you see him as depressive bipolar. It's disgusting. It's madness. It's insanity in the best common sense use of the word. It's out of touch with reality. It's a disconnect from the ability to be close and affectionate with young people in all their faces. It's a disconnect from any understanding which mental health professionals of all people ought to have in terms of how to help families and how to help young people and how to stay close to young people. It's a whole profession that has sold out to corporate pharmaceutical industry and its massive profits on the backs of the lives of these kids. It's so sad and tragic to see these kids wounded and damaged physically with tics and sluggishness and lethargic, and inwardly with all kinds of distress. It's kind of like the guys coming home from Iraq with missing arms and legs, or all kinds of trauma and imagination around still being in danger from the war. Or the kids over there being poisoned with depleted uranium. And then arguing about what's the timetable to withdraw from Iraq, or how to handle the latest surge tragedy, or whether the bombing today in Baghdad was successful. It's not right.